and welcome to the Archaeological Society of Delaware's Digging Delaware series. Here, I'll be speaking with Delaware archaeologists about their experiences and how they got into archaeology. I'm your host, Curtis McCoy, and our guest today is archaeologist Wade Katz. So welcome, Wade. Why don't you give us a little background on who you are?
Hi, Curtis. Thanks for having me today. My training is in actually American history, so my graduate and undergraduate degrees are both from the University of Delaware. I have been doing cultural resource management work and historic preservation work since the early 1980s, so it's somewhere around 40 years. I've worked for the University of Delaware for a time for a university-based archaeological research center. I worked for the state Department of Natural Resources. I've worked for the balance of my career as a cultural resource management professional with a couple different cultural resources firms. And now I'm my own cultural resource management firm, South River Heritage Consulting. And so for the last couple of years, since 2017, that's been my own. I kind of put my own shingle out to see how that would work out. So things are good.
Great. Well, with all of that extensive background, what made you actually want to get into archaeology?
That's an interesting question, and I've thought about this at various times. I probably became interested in archaeology and history because my main area of interest is in historical archaeology, although I've worked in both Native American archaeology and historical period material. I was, as a child, coming back across, I was born in California, so when we were driving back across the United States, we stopped at a couple locations, including the Wapatki Indian village outside of the Grand Canyon. And I have a distinct recollection, probably being about 3 or 4 years old, of climbing around on the Wapatki Indian village ruins, which is a Pueblo ruin of some kind. And then later, a vacation up into Cape Cod, where we were on an island that clearly had a Second World War military base on it. But in my young child view, I was walking around on like Roman ruins. It just struck me as really kind of exciting. And so I think that's when I had the interest in not just the history itself, but in the material remains that go with those things. And so the objects and the places, the spots where the building itself is still readily available and can be seen.
Yeah, and I feel like I've had that same kind of experience as a professional, just doing work at Fort DuPont here and Fort Delaware. You get that same kind of feeling.
Yeah, well, and I did early in my career. I worked at Fort Delaware. I worked on the cultural resource management plan there and did a couple different projects. I've worked at Fort DuPont as well. So the large-scale resource that you see, sort of the monumental architecture, is often really interesting to get a chance to look at. So and then I think, staying in that vein, I did high school work that included historical archaeology or archaeology as a background, and my undergraduate work was out for a short time, was at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, and the one professor that I had there suggested that historical archaeology was a really good field to begin to go into, because at that time it was pretty wide open. There wasn't a whole lot. There were a lot of people working in it, but it was a very, very young field in the late 70s. That would have been.
Well, in a minute or less, what's some of your current research interests?
I'm working on a number of different projects right now. The Fort Casimir Archaeological Project, which is an American Battlefield Protection Program funded project. The people who got the grant were the Newcastle Historical Society, so we've been working with them. And I actually have been working as the lead consultant with the team, and Dovetail is actually one of the members of the team, as is Archae 3D, which is a photogrammetry organization that's been working on the project as well. So we're excavating the site of Fort Casimir and trying to understand the battle in 1664 that took the site. I have been doing a number of battlefield projects, Brandywine Battlefield. I have one down in Virginia, which is associated with the Yorktown campaign, called the Battle of the Hook. I have another one up in the Mohawk River Valley, the Battle of Stone Arabia, and these are different years of the American Revolution, but they're all part of the American Revolution. So I've done a number of battlefield projects since before I left the firm I was at before I started my own. I was doing a number of those kind of projects. So I've got others that are, preservation management things that I'm doing. There's a Haswhopper site that I'm involved with right now outside of Newport, Delaware. I have some teaching work coming up at Westchester University. Not so sure. I was supposed to have a project in Princeton in the fall, but I don't think that's going to happen based on the virus, that they're not going to probably hold the class, and they'll push the class to a different period of time. So I got a lot of projects going on that are really exciting and enjoyable to be working on.
Well, from all of the projects that you've worked on in your career, what's one of your best or worst field stories?
That's I try to avoid the worst field stories, because I kind of think that every project you do is a challenge. No matter what you do, there's going to be something a little quirky about the crew, quirky about the project, quirky about your client, and that's kind of how you have to look at them. So I had a project once years and years ago that I did where one of my crew members was from the extreme southern portion of Virginia, and we were down in this kind of it was a Delaware project just outside of the village of Christiana, and we were down this long muddy road, and it started to snow in the afternoon, and it was snowing hard, and so rather than us leave, which the members of the project team all wanted to do, she felt that she had never seen snow before, and so she really wanted to stay and see the snow. And we're all going, this is not a good thing to do. We got to get out of here before we're trapped down here, and we're not going to be able to leave. So, from a best standpoint, I found that was neat because it gave her an opportunity to see the snow. And that site was a really exciting site because just the elements of the building. It was clearly not a building that anybody had built to code, and so its walls were some of the strangest walls I had ever seen. And the best part of any of these projects is always just trying to figure out how the site fits together. And so that one in itself was probably built as a structure for a man who was a mariner, who had a boat that came in and out of that building. And I never had seen anything like that before.
Well, related to that, what's one of the coolest things you've ever learned from an archaeological project?
One of my first projects I ever worked on was in Wilmington, and we found colonial-ware in the excavations. And up until that point, no one had really identified colonial-ware on Delaware sites. That was the thesis work I did at the University of Delaware, and actually helped understand that there was colonial-ware spread throughout the Delaware River Valley, and it could be seen in other communities along the East Coast. In the case of the Wilmington material, it was probably associated with refugees, both French and French African, I guess would be the way to put it, that came out of Saint-Domingue. And Wilmington had a very strong connection with the West Indies and the French West Indies and its trading. So it's in all likelihood, and Wilmington got a population, African-American population, of French African population into the city for a brief period of time. But if you look at the documents, that group of people isn't there for very long. They show up in one census and disappear by the next. So it was the object, the artifact, that actually led you to think about it in a different way, that there was something else here. Why would these objects be here? How would that affect us?
So Wade, our last question is, how are you surviving quarantine?
Well, because I'm basically, South River Heritage Consulting is me, and as I've sometimes joked that it's me and my four-legged friend who is my kind of health and safety officer. I work from home a lot anyhow, so I would prefer to be able to go out and do things, but much of my work is sort of like in isolation anyhow. And I would prefer to be able to have face-to-face meetings with people. It is changing how I'm supposed to have had some public meetings and things that I can't do because we can't hold those. But other than that, I'm kind of hanging in there and working on writing and working on getting documents finished and reports finished that need to be finished and sent off to various clients. So as we're beginning to come out of this, I have projects that are scheduled to go, to be in the field or be meeting with people over the next week or so. I also have recently, all my family has returned from Hawaii, so I have my grandkids here, and we're able to to spend some time with them. So quarantine is kind of a mixed blessing. You know, you have time to spend with people, and there's things that can be done in the yard that you can go outside and work on things, and go out and walk, and then still come back in and work on stuff. So I feel like I've kind of adapted to it fairly well.
Well, Wade, thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Curtis. It was a pleasure to speak with you. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Well, we'll see you next time.